Hi guys, and welcome back. When Feliks Audio NV Performance Edition first entered my system, I didn't know what to expect, but right there it was clear to me that I'm not dealing with a regular headphone amplifier that is passing through for evaluation. And after months of testing, of tube rolling, it was clear to me that this is one of the most emotionally engaging headphone amplifier that passed through my hands. It was not perfect, I believe that no amplifier is like that, but it came dangerously close to that title. Today, however, I'll try the latest iteration of the NV amplifier called Susvara edition, which I'll call the SE edition from now on, which cranked everything up a few notches, including its price. Before I mention how much it costs, I just want to say that this is their flagship headphone amplifier destined to drive planar and dynamic headphones, and therefore it's not affordable at all. It will cost you 12,999 euros here locally, and for a price in your currency, please ask for your local Feliks Audio dealer. This will be a long video because I've been cooking this one for about 3 months now, so please prepare a snack and a drink and let's go ahead with this review. Today I want to discuss its look, build quality and working principle, because you already have my Feliks Audio NV Performance Edition review somewhere around here. I will, however, focus on what's changed on today's unit. First of all, we have a slightly different shade of wood. It's much darker, as you can see, and personally I prefer the Zebrano wood on my original amplifier, but hey, what's inside this amp is what makes it quite special. You can also see a slight difference in lettering around the tubes, informing us that we're dealing with the Susvara limited edition. The second, I believe, much cooler difference is that instead of getting the low, mid and high output impedance setting of the original NV, we now have the low, high and Susvara setting, which provides up to 12% higher voltage output on this particular setting. Apart from this, we're looking at the same Feliks Audio NV amplifier having the same inputs and outputs. On the inside, however, the changes are quite substantial. In transformer-coupled amplifiers like this one, the most important components are the output transformers, and this is where we have the biggest change and the biggest improvement. The higher the quality of these transformers, means higher quality power will be delivered to the wall circuit, and therefore the sound will get purer, more detailed and more dynamic at the same time. Instead of regular transformers, we have amorphous core transformers made by Lundahl, and if you want to know a lot more about their working principle, what's really the difference, then I wholeheartedly recommend checking out my written review, which explains everything and why that is actually quite a big upgrade. Secondly, we have improved signal wiring for better conductivity and for less interference. Thirdly, we have much higher quality signal critical components such as resistors and also capacitors, which are basically the same found in their 25th anniversary edition, which, mind you, is considerably costlier compared to the Susvara edition. We also get preamp modifications and optimizations, which I'll discuss in about 2-3 minutes or something like that, driving to monoblock amplifiers and later the loudspeakers that you can see behind me. And the last improvement is, instead of getting the Electro Harmonix 300B, which are basically the most affordable, the cheapest 300B tubes that you can buy right now, or slightly better full music 300B tubes, we now get the Stradi S300B, which in my opinion are among the best 300B power tubes that you can get right now. Maybe these are not as large sounding like the Western Electric 300B, but at the same time these are more technical sounding, there is more inner texture, more resolution. I find them clearer sounding overall, and since they can dissipate more power compared to those Western Electric, you can expect a longer service life, and last but not least, The soundstage effects are also improved on the Stradi versus the Western Electric. If you want to know every single improvement on the SE edition, then again, I cannot recommend you enough the written review that I left below, so please check that out. Around 2017, Hi-Fi released their flagship headphones, the Susvara, and the most headphone amplifiers at that time would output maybe 1 watt, 2 if you were lucky, but in truth, the headphone market was not really prepared for such an unconventionally hard-to-drive pair of headphones. At that time, I was collecting a few headphone amplifiers. I think I had like 10 amplifiers at my place, but none of them were truly driving the Hi-Fi Susvara, so much so that I decided to drive them with integrated and even power amplifiers. I went even crazier than that, and I used 2 monoblock amplifiers with a preamp to drive the damn Susvara, because it was the only way to unleash the maximum potential and to not hear that clip again or turning off amplifiers, anything like that. That's the best sound that I tried from them exactly at that point. Fast forward a couple of years and finally I could see a pretty substantial shift in headphone amplifier designs, because people were finally going back to the drawing board and they're starting developing some beefier, scarier, bigger, much more powerful headphone amplifiers. In a way, the standard edition Envy is that kind of amplifier. It's very powerful, it's potent, but it was gently clipping with the Susvara OG when going way higher on that volume wheel and with bass intensive music. So the exact words that I mentioned in my review, let me read them very shortly. They sounded exceptionally at lower volumes, but I do not recommend throwing disco parties with the Susvara OG on the Envy, as that might stress the amplifier into gentle clipping. So yeah, it was amazing, but not the best with the Susvara OG. Enter the Envy Susvara edition, which feels like a completely different amplifier on the inside. There is more power on top, it's much more resolving, much clearer sounding, it's more dynamic at the same time, and although it's called Susvara edition, and yes, it sounds absolutely fantastic with both Susvara OG and also with the Susvara Unveiled, you can use it basically with any other headphone available right now, and more often than not I'm using some other headphones. Like when I want to rock out, I'm using the T+A Solitaire P, which are delivering that amazing bass impact and also out-of-head soundstage. And when I feel like tired or drained, I would use those Bando Savia, which are more emotional, creamier sounding, softer, fun sounding in a way. And if you want to know more about these headphones, you can again check my review for the Bando Savia somewhere around here. Both Susvara models sounded exceptional on the Envy SE, but everybody expected that. But so does every other headphone that I tried on the Susvara edition, because all of those improvements on the inside targeted a purer and a clearer sound with fewer potholes in front of the signal path. And let's discuss exactly that. My former Trafomatic Primavera headphone amplifier taught me things that I never believed for more than 15 years about tube amplifiers. I had my preconceptions, I had plenty of tube amplifiers, but not like that one. It was a 32 kilo beast pumping 10 watts of power and with no gain selectors whatsoever. It was completely whisper quiet with a pair of ultra sensitive amps. I was mind blown, I was gobsmacked. I could see those few meters dancing to the rhythm of the music, but there was simply no noise passing through with ultra sensitive amps, just music, and that's all. And of course, I simply realized that everything I knew about tube amplifiers was simply wrong. You can make ultra quiet, ultra detailed, ultra transparent sounding tube amplifiers. Resolution was pushed forward, more so on the Primavera than compared to my solid-state headphone amplifiers, and for a moment it felt like I'm listening to music for the first time in my life. In a way, the Feliks Envy Performance Edition is very similar, and it made me look much deeper into the mix and appreciate small nuances and inner details more so than before. However, after swapping it with the Susvara edition, I can say right now that I've never heard a higher resolution amplifier than this. Not even the Ilium AM23R, the Barson Audio Soloist Voyager Max, or the Holo Audio Bliss KTA are as clean and as transparent sounding like the Envy Susvara edition. You could say that all of those amplifiers are super resolving and clean sounding, and that will be true. They're offering an open window towards your sound, but the Susvara edition is simply squeaky clean sounding by comparison, letting me hear ever so slightly more inner texture, more resolution, and more of everything really. I was blessed to own or to loan some of the best headphone amplifiers that humanity has ever created, but from the ones I tried up to this point, this is definitely taking the crown in terms of resolution and transparency. It's definitely a 10 out of 10 in terms of detail retrieval. Discussing dynamics on this amplifier is more redundant than ever. While on squeaky clean amplifiers like THX, AAA amplifiers or NFC amplifiers, you can hear everything on a micro scale, those are super resolving and all of that. But in time, over the years, I realized that all of those were stripping away the most important part of music listening. They made me hear the music, but they didn't make me feel the music. All that was left was an exaggerated resolution that was screeching, like really unpleasant in odd order harmonics rather than singing beautifully in even order harmonics like what I'm getting on tube amplifiers. Many solid state amplifiers of today are still big, glossy, super powerful, but many of them are still kinda hollow sounding inside, not so emotional, not so fun sounding, very strict, very resolving, but without pushing the fun factor or dynamics out. But that is not really the case with the Envy Susvara edition. So dynamics on the Envy Susvara edition, I'd call them brutal, raw, and testosterone driven. So again, this is as good as it gets in terms of dynamics and transit response on a tube amplifier. Discussing the power output on the Envy SE is like mumbling about horsepower in a hypercar. I believe is a little bit irrelevant at this point, but still let's talk about that. When you have an acceleration of 2.4 seconds or 2.8 seconds until reaching 100 kilometers per hour, it's really more or less the same to me, it's really irrelevant. But in the case of the Envy, that extra watt of power really makes a difference. We now have 9 watts of power versus 8 on the original Envy or on the Performance Edition, but that watt made it no longer clip with the Susvara OG at super loud volumes on bass heavy music. It's like having a can of nitro in a quarter-mile drag race. It's exactly that was missing on the original Envy. And this extra watt of power can make actually quite a substantial difference. Not with the biggest majority headphones on planet, but with those hardest to drive like Susvara OG, HE6, DCA Stealth, Expanse, Mod House Tungstens. With those, it will make pretty big difference. Real hi-fi reviewers should tell you all of the good and all of the bad, so I tried pushing it to its upper power limits, but no matter how high I went on that volume, it was always effortless, it always kept its composure, it was never clipping, so I can say that it's undeniably very powerful, more than it needs to be on several occasions, but that's exactly what differentiates it from so many amplifiers and why it exists in the first place. Just a week before Christmas, I was toying with the idea of upgrading my own preamp to the next level. Some might say to the ultimate level, because this one is called Chord Electronics Ultima Preamp. There is no code, no cipher. This is basically their top of the line in their lineup, and it should be pretty high-end sounding, I believe. But to do that, it meant I need to send my own preamplifier, I need to pay a substantial difference of money, shh, don't tell to my wife, and I needed to wait about 1 month until the new preamp would come over, meant that there was no music for me for about a month. But then I realized that I could use the Envy Susvara edition as a preamplifier, and that's exactly what I did. I simply connected my Chord Ultima 3 monoblock amplifiers and I started listening to music through my Radio TD 2.2 loudspeakers. I've used quite a few preamplifiers before. I believe the only component that I've changed so many times by now is actually the preamplifier, because it makes a tremendous difference in a stereo setup. So I tried the mono stereos by Musician, Benchmark HPA4, Hegel P20, Trafamatic Head 2, Kisses S4, Gold Note HP10, Live HP2A, Chord Electronics Ultima 3, and the list goes on. And when the Envy replaced my own preamplifier, I immediately noticed that the noise floor didn't go up, as it happened many times by now with many preamplifiers before. The noise floor was actually not there. I couldn't hear it in any way. I even approached those tweeters with my ears. I pushed the volume a little bit higher, but the sound was simply dead silent. It was a very clean sounding preamp, and that I realized right from the get-go. The sound remained as clean and as I know it to be for the last 2 years when I'm using my Ultima Pre 2, and for a moment I thought that my preamp was back in the system, because these two sound very close to each other. They both are super resolving, and everything that I already mentioned about its transparency and detail retrieval basically moved to this stereo setup, to this room, because in truth this is an extremely clean sounding preamplifier. Engaging Interstellar and Inception soundtracks by Hans Zimmer made me realize that it is indeed playing in the big league and can be compared with some of the best preamplifiers that passed through my hands. Maybe it was not as 3D and as holographic and as airy like my own preamp, but it came so incredibly close. There is one unwritten rule that is circulating online among stereo heads, that if you use solid-state electronics, then a tube preamplifier is all you need. This is the way they say, because it will add lushness, richness, it will improve the tone and timbre, and also the soundstage effects will be much nicer. And that is definitely true. And if you're using bookshelf speakers, the change can be quite dramatic, because finally you can hear the low end going lower and also the sound getting bigger, even if you're still using bookshelf speakers. And in a nutshell, that's exactly what I have experienced on the Envy Susvara edition. I've got a bold tonality that emphasizes a thick bass and mid-range delivery. The funky part is that all of this comes at you without adding distortion or loosening a screw in any frequency region. Tightness remains unspoiled and the fun factor goes through the roof. Okay guys, now let's move on to the only comparison that matters, Feliks Envy Performance Edition versus the Susvara Edition. But before we move on, I just want to say that I no longer have the Performance Edition with me. I upgraded it to the Susvara Edition. But don't worry, I've used the Performance Edition for about 1 year now, and I've used the Susvara Edition for about 3 months now, so I clearly remember how they both sound. I believe it's still a valid comparison, even if I rely only on my memory. The most important impressions that you will ever get when additioning a new component in the system that you know so well are the very first minutes, or dare I say even the very first seconds of use, because your brain does a lot of heavy processing when you listen to music. It even adjusts some of the things you don't like. It even corrects the frequency response so much that in a couple of days, something that sounded bad to you at first might sound passable or even good days later. That's your brain tricking you, making you feel comfortable, even if the sound is not that great. But when a new component comes over, your brain analyzes, it observes, it doesn't beautify it yet, that will happen minutes later. So in the end, the first impressions are always the most important and everlasting impressions. The Envy SE is the only amplifier that let me look deeper into the music and be part of the music. It's not just purer, clearer, more detailed and more transparent, but at the same time it's much easier to get in the mood. I no longer need a drink or a coffee or close my eyes or anything like that. I'm just getting there in seconds, something that it's really hard to say on any other amplifier. Small nuances became bold ones, so all of those tiny things are no longer tiny, but like huge ones. I was no longer questioning the existence of those tiny nuances. They became real and I could hear them without any effort. This is the absolute biggest difference the SE edition brings over the Performance edition or the Standard edition. And with the veil completely lifted, there are so many other things positively affected by this. The contrast becomes much higher. So the difference between the lower intensity and the highest intensity note is now bigger, so therefore contrast, dynamic range much nicer. It's like comparing an OLED display with an IPS or VA panel. It's a massive difference in contrast, and that's exactly what I hear on the Envy Susvara edition versus the Performance edition. It hits a much higher ceiling in terms of dynamics, and for people like me, dynamics can be basically everything because it dictates what is fun, what is boring, what I need to listen to, and what I need to pack and send back to the manufacturer. So this is a fun and super dynamic sounding amplifier. The Envy Susvara edition doesn't do much to the signal, to be completely honest with you. The only thing it does is disappear. It's not there, it's not influencing the signal. It's a wire with gain amplifier, making your headphones or speakers attain their true glory. So it's not there when you listen to music, and the stain it leaves on the music is much fainter than ever before. Of course, it's still tubey. It can be creamy or romantic sounding depending on the tube selection. And also depending on the music that you are listening to. The extra power on top is also helpful to some, especially if you like to use a couple of headphones and some of them are hard to drive, then of course it's much easier recommending the Susvara edition. And once you no longer hear your Susvara clipping, it's really hard going back to the previous amplifier that was not that great with this particular headphone. You cannot unhear the difference it makes with these behemoths that shouldn't exist in the first place. Wrapping up is the same good old Envy, but pushed to the extreme this time around. Technicalities are now reaching much higher grounds, and I believe that things like transparency or detail retrieval no longer matter on this amplifier. Noise floor is still dead silent with ultra-sensitive IMs, and also that extra watt of power made it much more universal sounding with basically every headphone available in my stable. The only elephant in the room is that it will cost you 12,999 euros, so it's not really for everyone. It's quite expensive, and if it's worth it or not, that's the question that you should answer yourselves. As for me, it holds a special place in my heart because no other tube or solid-state headphone amplifier sounded as transparent and as pure to me. From this moment, this will be my new benchmark tube headphone amp, the one that others will try to outperform in the coming years. I already purchased a stash of tubes that will probably last me around 10 years, and it goes without saying that it fully deserved my absolute highest Editor's Choice Award that I'm giving once per year per category. Thanks as always for watching, everyone, and before you go, please do not forget to check out my written review that I left below, which contains on average about 3 times the information of this video. It's a must read. Also, please consider liking, disliking, maybe subscribing to this YouTube channel if you found this video helpful, and I'll see you next week with an AI-driven DACAM combo. Cheers!